I think of television as, I think I said earlier, as a kind of technology of race. Right? And as a technology of race, it does exactly what we've been talking about. It naturalizes and normalizes. It gets us to see these things as not remarkable.
How can we imagine something different that comes out of a different history, a different set of facts for Black people? And I think that's what Afrofuturism does for us. It says that our stories need not be bound by this sort of history of a storytelling that comes out of oppression.
So white influencers will get paid $20,000 for a sponsor placement, and Black influencers will get paid $500. And that's according to the research done by Taylor Lorenz and other TikTok reporters, right? Showing the disparities in both the financial treatment and the amount of reach that these influencers have.
One thing that can be done is talking in simple, direct language that most people can understand and repeating. And that is how you instill a frame in people, is simple examples, simple language, repetition, keep associating the same things together. For example, white people and Black people, we share the same interests.
We're just trying to say we need to understand how we got here so we'll understand how to get out of this situation and make this more of a fair playing field for everyone.
This documentary, Racialism in the Media, is based on 25 years of my research. It explores how the media constructs, controls, and manipulates racial ideology in our society. Now, the media does not have an all-encompassing control over an audience, but it has been documented that certain images and messages can influence certain people in certain ways at certain times.
At the root of it is that we're buying and selling not just images of people, we're buying and selling desire. We're buying and selling ideas about who we are, what's valuable, what we value, what we desire. And that's all tied into advertising. It's all tied into the way we think about, attaching, say, sneakers to a body, or attaching a basketball to a body, or attaching comedy to a body, right? So all of these ways, and I'm using these terms, attaching things to bodies, because I want to underscore the ways in which certain kinds of bodies are valued in the marketplace differently than other kinds of bodies.
So let's start with an understanding of what racialism is. Racialism examines images and messages about African American culture. These messages and images are based on stereotypes, biased frames, historical myths, and traditional racism. Through these representations, problematic ideas and images are normalized, and they ultimately shape and influence societal ideology and behavior.
So what I love about racialism is that it really pushes the work of scholars like me to get out of that here's a stereotype, there's a stereotype kind of rut, right? Stereotypes are kind of functional. So people believe that we either stereotype or we don't. And if we get rid of stereotypes, then we'll be okay. Racialism complicates that.
Stereotypes operate under racialism in more subtle and covert ways. For example, this Black model is holding a slice of watermelon on the beach. Why? There's a stereotype that suggests Black people love watermelon. Another example is this Nivea ad, which shows a Black man with his hair cut low. He's about to throw away a version of his head with a large, bushy afro. The ad logo says, "Re-civilize yourself," suggesting that the natural texture of his hair is uncivilized. In this controversial ad, the Black child is wearing a hoodie that has "Coolest Monkey in the Jungle" written across the front. This magazine photo shoot features prominent model Naomi Campbell in Africa racing a cheetah under the title Wild Things. Current research has very clearly demonstrated that mediated texts provide viable ideas and visual stimulation. They feed our societal norms, and ultimately, they can influence how meaning is constructed and understood.
Just continuing this thought about getting outside of that kind of functional, transactional moment with stereotype, or even either it's racist or it's not, it's racism or it's not. What that does is that it leads people down this path that, oh, if we just fix this, if we just turn this off, then everything will be okay.
Cultivation theory suggests that mediated images and messages are an important part of how people see the world. George Gerbner, a prominent communication scholar, used cultivation theory to study how television impacts society's views. As early as 1969, Gerbner found that heavy television viewers tended to believe that the world presented on television was the same as the real world. In other words, as stereotypes and other mediated ideas and images are normalized through the media, they can become common representations and norms accepted by the audience.
So it's interesting that you ask about, sort of the impact of racialism on Black audiences, because often we're so concerned about what does it mean when folks outside of our race take up these kinds of ideologies and belief systems, and what impact does it have on us? Well, so let's talk about, well, what does it mean when we ourselves grow up under a constant diet of these kinds of bias frames, right? These stories that don't always favor us, prize us. What does it mean when we ourselves are educated by messages that are so distorted about who and what we are? What does that internalization process look like?
Under the umbrella of racialism, there are 4 significant areas that can help us expose, deconstruct, and critique the media concerning race. These are stereotypes, biased frames, historical myths, and traditional racism. Stereotypes are the common use of stereotypical images and messages as repetitive ideas about African American culture. In this ad, red Kool-Aid can be considered a stereotype for the Black community. But the more obvious problem is the basketball under the young Black man's foot. Notice that he's wearing hush puppies rather than tennis shoes, and he's not even on a basketball court.
So 2 things strike me about this that I would just call up. One of them is the ways in which the images in the frame seem to naturally belong there. And what I simply mean is that what's hidden are the ways in which it is assembled. And its very assembly means that there were a set of choices made about what to put there, where to put them, right, and how to shoot them, right? So it's that moment that we hide the choices that it becomes naturalized. So there is no necessary belonging between a basketball and a Black male body. It could have just as easily been under her foot, because there's the WNBA, right? But also the idea that the basketball and Kool-Aid and Black bodies belong in the same frame.
Racialism gets out of that kind of transactional, functional moment that stereotype captures. Racialism says tropes, stereotypes, all of those things are one part of a larger ideology that our society buys into.
The stereotype of Black men as criminals is prominent across many media genres, and it feeds a specific ideology. We can find examples in films and television programs such as Power, True to the Game, and Snowfall. In the news with headlines like, "Homicide is pandemic's biggest killer of young Black men." And gangster rap which is perpetuated by prominent rappers like 50 Cent's 2 Chainz and Chief Keef, who promote the stereotype of the black man as a drug dealer, thug, or criminal.
There was a time in the 90s when record labels sought out black teenagers or young adults with criminal records with the view of presenting hip-hop and these artists as being authentic. In fact, the magazine XXL had a special edition called The Jail, featuring all hip-hop artists who had criminal records. And that really further advanced and institutionalized that stereotypical view of black men being criminal.
When it comes to television, executive producer Shonda Rhimes has done a great job of developing complex black female characters.
What I like about kind of Shonda's productions is that there are these exposures to the deep and rich sort of history and understanding of blackness. When, a Cicely Tyson shows up on the set, when there's a moment where, they're greasing scalps, where the wig comes off and there's natural hair under, those are also the important moments within sort of larger stories that may be sort of blackness adjacent or outside of blackness, but we're also looking for those pearls and nuggets.
In Scandal, the main character, Olivia Pope, could be called a Jezebel based on her multiple sexual relationships, especially the primary one with a married man, the President of the United States. Annalise Keating in How to Get Away with Murder was critiqued as the angry black woman because of her aggressive attitude. And Dr. Miranda Bailey on Grey's Anatomy was initially seen as a mammy figure at Grey Sloan Memorial Hospital, taking care of the interns when she began her reign.
Media mogul Tyler Perry has created characters with stereotypical twists and turns, like Medea as a modern-day mammy with an attitude. And then there's Mr. Brown, who has been compared to a full-blown Zip Coon stereotype, dressing to the extreme with exaggerated behavior while poorly using the English language.
So those stereotypes are very, very much alive today, mainly because they have been institutionalized, they have been popularized, they have been presented as the norm of black behavior.
Biased framing examines the shaping and creation of black cultural issues in adverse ways.
When we think about framing, what we mean is taking some aspects of all the complicated reality out there and selecting a few of them, and with that selection, promoting a particular interpretation. Now, what happens when, for example, you're talking about covering crime on local TV news? You will frequently see lots of black men being shown in the role of accused criminals. But only a few aspects of the reality are included in the frame. And frequently, the only information you get is from the point of view of the prosecution and the cops. So we're getting a really distorted or biased view of that particular story. Now, sometimes, of course, they are guilty, of course. But sometimes it's a much more complicated story. And not only that, even if they're guilty of the crime, there's a whole lot of other information that's left out. So do we know, was that kid discriminated against? Was that kid beaten up by the cops 3 times before he finally turned to a life of crime? Was that kid hungry? Was that kid subject to gang intimidation? I mean, there's so many parts of the story that are left out that even if the perpetrator is guilty of the crime, there's a whole lot of other information that might make you more sympathetic and understanding and less angry.
The construction of a news story involves certain information, images, and sources that will determine what is considered to be important. From 1987 to 1990, I lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And long before I knew what racialism or a biased frame was, I experienced a key example. At that time, there were two local serial killers on trial for murder, Marty Graham and Gary Heidnik. In the newspapers, there were mugshots of Graham all over the front page and every night on the 6 o'clock news. When it came to Heidnik, I never saw one photo, one mugshot, and no video images on the 6 o'clock news to show what he looked like. And I looked. While gathering images for this documentary, I discovered, of course, that there are photos, videos, and mugshots of Heidnik. But key decision makers in Philadelphia's local news media at the time chose not to use them, thus shaping and creating a biased frame.
My dissertation was on the response of online black folk to the images that were being circulated, the pictures by Agence France Presse, by the AP, of black folk wading through the water, carrying stuff behind them in post-Hurricane New Orleans, right, and of white folk wading through the water. And if you remember, those images, the black folk were labeled as looters and the white folk were labeled as finders. And black folk online at the time were really kind of like, this is a problematic media framing. So immediately, following the Web 2.0 era, where black folk were starting to write blogs, this became a space for a type of alternative comment section with their own perspectives. And they really had a problem with these framings. They also talked about refugees versus evacuees, where they had pictures of black folk who had lost everything, sitting there destitute in the hot Louisiana sun at the New Orleans Superdome, right? And they were being called refugees as if they were not United States citizens, right? And so media images have been a way, thanks to the affordances of the internet, that black folk can immediately and pungently respond to media framings of blackness.
Historical myths involve an examination of the derogatory use of knowledge and cultural images when it comes to Africa. Africa is usually portrayed in the media in a very negative light, with stories of war, poverty, wild animals, and starvation. King Kong is a significant example of how historical myth functions. This myth involves black men being compared to apes or monkeys. A significant example of how historical myth functions is King Kong's obsession with a white woman, representing the fear about black and white relations. That's why the 2008 cover of Vogue magazine, featuring basketball great LeBron James, posed like King Kong from a World War I Army recruitment poster, created a major controversy.
But it is the idea that the white woman is the prize of the African American male, but also the prize of the athlete. The picture itself is highly motivated. It's highly organized to produce a kind of shock, but it's also drawing on these historical, deeply embedded ideas about sexuality, about masculinity, about desire, about fear.
LeBron James with Giselle, he probably didn't remember the King Kong image. And yet, in some ways, here we are in a room. He's participated in this construction. She has, the photographer has, and no one in that room said stop, right? But if they had understood the power of this notion of racialism, then maybe someone would have said, okay, wait a minute. We have a history. We've seen a diet of these kinds of images, and we're not going to produce this again.
Afrofuturism evolved in the early 1990s to counter the biased framing of African American culture often found in science fiction and horror genres. The goal is to make sure African Americans are included in the future. The most exciting example of Afrofuturism are the popular Black Panther movies, which present a positive picture of African culture as progressive and exceptional. Traditional racism is defined under racialism as being purposeful, offensive, and malicious. For example, a white person calling a black person the N-word, someone hanging a noose on a gate at the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., burning a cross in a black neighbor's yard, or an alt-right rally against people of color. The term racism has extreme historical and emotional ties, pushing it into a deep abyss of negativity, fear, and hatred. The problem is, when we focus on those extremes, we often miss the subtle but more important elements of racialism that can be just as powerful and problematic. One primary example of traditional racism is blackface. This recent Dunkin' Donuts ad shows a model in blackface promoting their chocolate donut.
So these images began very, very early in our history, and they've been maintained over the years and justified in various ways. And these images became real through blackface minstrelsy in the 1800s, 1830s, 40s, and continued into the 20th century. So blackface minstrelsy became the major form of American entertainment. And it's basically centered on imitating, exaggerating these stereotypical behaviors and images of black people. But through blackface minstrelsy, those images became larger than life. They became real. They became black people.
The election of the first African American president in the United States should have brought about a post-racial society, but instead, that progressive achievement triggered a dangerous racist backlash.
You began to see editorial cartoons that were taken up on Black Twitter where they showed Michelle Obama with her arms out looking like a gorilla, or Obama and Michelle and Kafié, right, doing a fist bump in the Oval Office, right? And the media played a large part in reposting those images to social media, and black folk took a lot of their time to tear them down. But it was remarkable how those media images began circulating and percolating.
One example during Obama's run for a second term was a bumper sticker that appeared down south. It read, "Don't renege in 2012. Stop repeat offenders. Don't re-elect Obama." Most people understood that the concept of renege represented the N-word, a hateful and offensive label tied to black people. In this Fox Nation article, the headline reads, "Obama's hip-hop barbecue does not create jobs." This is biased framing, because it was not a hip-hop barbecue, but President Obama's 50th birthday party that had nothing to do with creating jobs. Also, notice that despite the focus on hip-hop, of the 4 black male images, only 1 is a rapper.
Malcolm X once said, "The media has the power to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent. And that's power, because they control the minds of the masses."
When you think of the news as a system of power, that is to say, it influences how people interpret the world, how people think other groups affect them. Are these groups on our side, or are they on another side? Are they part of us, or are they part of them? It translates into less power for blacks, both directly because they're them, and indirectly because it makes alliances between blacks and whites less likely.
Race and television, race and media kind of can be thought of as different systems of power who operate to make us think that racial positions, authority, life chances based on race are inevitable, they are natural, it's always been that way, it's always going to be that way. And even as we tinker around the edges of improvement, progress, that the dominant order is that we live in a racial hierarchy. And that hierarchy has everything to do with us as individuals, and very little to do with policy, very little to do with history, very little to do with decisions that people make in terms of distributing power and authority and resources. So I think of racialism as describing both the historical process in which that order of things gets cemented, it gets baked in. And once it's baked in and it shows up on our television screens, in our literature, in our films, in our advertising, then the more it shows up, the less we think about it. And the less we think about it, the more normal it becomes. And the more normal it becomes, the more naturalized it becomes.
In this Chew University ad, we have to give them credit for making sure that a variety of races are included. However, the positioning of the Black and Asian children behind the white child is problematic.
You have 3 babies, you have an Asian baby, a white baby, and a black baby, and the white baby's in front. And I still see a lot of that. I see a lot of that in movie posters, in posters for TV shows that are integrated. They're focalized on the white character. The white character is the one who gets most of the lines and most of the drama, and the black character remains a helper, maybe a buddy.
Black people are the ones who have constantly pushed the boundaries, whether it's through creativity, like Grandmaster Flash turning a turntable into an instrument, or basketball players going beyond the norm. That's it, going beyond and now creating new outliers for excellence.
There are other examples of racialism that offer more neutral or even positive portrayals, such as this Pine Sol ad. Despite the fact that this is an ad for a cleaning product, the ad is a mammy stereotype with a twist. Instead of a plus-sized, non-sexual image, this mammy is sexually constructed. She's positioned laying down in a satin robe, her hair is shiny and long, her makeup is flawless, and she is beautiful. A second example comes from Tide detergent, with an image that totally dismantles the stereotype of the black man as a criminal or the missing black father. Race is used very effectively to contrast these two types of life cereals. The black girl and boy represent maple and brown sugar, while the white mother and son represent regular life cereal. In the media, racialism slips by unnoticed, molded into popular images, words, and ideas. Unfortunately, when racial images are normalized as part of the media, we all buy in. For example, if a child grows up seeing black men primarily shown as criminals in the news, on primetime television shows, in popular films, and through gangster rap music videos, the black man as a criminal becomes the norm. Today, more people need to speak out and challenge these kinds of negative images and messages.
What racialism does is it reminds us just how embedded, right? Like a number of other systems and institutions and the ways that we move things forward in our socio-political world, we can't set media aside as something separate from all of these powerful belief system creating machines. To think that it only comes out of one source or out of one mindset is to fail.
Racialism is not an effort to let racists and racism off the hook, but rather a means to expose, deconstruct, and critique other factors that make up the connection between race and media. The goal of racialism is to identify and ultimately transform racial inequalities found in media programs, products, and practices. It is an effort to provoke change when it comes to the problematic racial images and messages that we have all come to know and love.